In today's video, we're taking a look at the Toronto Maple Leafs and some additional fallout from all the news we've had in the past couple of days. Could they be forced to a situation where Austin Matthews might be traded, or they could risk losing him for nothing next offseason? Certainly his future is going to be the big topic that we follow with the Leafs this offseason, besides the new GM and coach coming to town. Plus, we have updates on the Ottawa Senators sale process, the updates coming out of Calgary for their new coach and GM. The Memorial Cup teams are all set, and we also have more word as well on Columbus Blue Jackets head coach. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here in today's video. Let's kick things off with the Memorial Cup, which is the Canadian Junior Hockey League Championship to be national champions here. Gets underway this coming weekend with all of the teams in the mix are now completely settled. Of course, in case you're unfamiliar, the CHL is comprised of the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. All three teams go through their league playoffs to determine a league champion. And those three teams join a host city to make up a four-team tournament to crown Canada's national champions for Major Junior Hockey. So, of course, the Kamloops Blazers out in BC are hosting this year's tournament. We've known that for some time. The Quebec Major Junior Hockey League champions ended up being the Quebec Ramparts. They defeated the Halifax Mooseheads in somewhat stunning fashion in Game 6 to win the league championship yesterday. Halifax actually had a one-goal lead with 2.5 minutes or so to go, and the Ramparts came back and stunned them with a couple of late ones to take the game and win Game 6 and win the league championship. So Patrick Waugh is the league champion as a head coach. Of course, he's also part owner of the Ramparts, and he'll be off to the Memorial Cup. And the Ontario Hockey League was settled last night as well, with the Peterborough Petes defeating the London Knights in Game 6 as well. So obviously Peterborough goes to the Memorial Cup, Ontario Hockey League champions. That team also features some key people, including Rangers top prospect Brennan Hoffman, who was a trade deadline pickup for Peterborough. And in the Western League, that one was settled first. The Seattle Thunderbirds, which is an absolutely stacked team, defeated the Winnipeg Ice, who also has their fair share of top NHL prospects as well. Obviously, Seattle has a lot of key players there that will be interesting to watch. Led, of course, by goalie Thomas Milic, Kevin Korchinski, and so many others on that team that are going to be heading to the NHL, including Brad Lambert, Dylan Gunter, and others. So Seattle has had a heck of a run. They've been a stacked team here for some time. Not surprised that these are the teams that ended up winning. So we now have that set. This should be a fun tournament to get started with next weekend. Of course, we have lots of updates over the course of the weekend on the Ottawa Senators sale. Of course, that is getting closer and closer to being, I wouldn't say finalized, but to knowing who the preferred bidder is going to be, so that we know basically who the new owners are and they have a chance to close the sale. Like I reported yesterday, he was leaning towards Michael Andlauer being the expected preferred bidder, the winner, if you want to call it that. But now it doesn't seem to be quite so certain based on reports that are coming out today. It seems like it's really could be closer than we think, and we may not get the results on Tuesday like we were hoping for. It might be a couple of more extra days. Now, the one thing as well, I see a lot of Sens fans on social media talking about how quickly the sale process can be done, and I understand that the Ottawa Senators have some key business to take care of, and that obviously the ownership situation is going to have an impact on when some of that business gets done, and talking about how, it may not be closed until like August, for example. Like, any standard sale of this sort, or whether it be a sports team or in a major transaction like this, takes 60 to 90 days, and this is after you get to that point where a sale is reached. So you have to be patient here. This is pretty normal, normal stuff. If you're familiar with that part of the finance world at all, that is nothing out of the ordinary. So yes, they might be a little late getting things done, but this whole process has taken a long time, and it's a big sale, so it's really not all that unusual. Bruce Garriock of the Ottawa Sun also reporting today that his sources are saying that Ryan Reynolds will not be joining the winning bid or any group that's still in the running here to be the new owners of the Ottawa Senators, that he's completely out. He was obviously partnered with the Remington Group. Once that group pulled out, that he's obviously flattered to be asked, but will not be joining forces with anybody else to become part owner of the Sens. Now in Calgary, we talked about yesterday how Frank Seravalli had reported that it was looking like Craig Conroy would be named the new GM of the Flames on Tuesday. We got further updates today with Frank Seravalli also confirming that he believes Dave Nonis will be indeed joining Conroy. Yesterday we talked about the fact that there was some speculation that Nonis might be involved. It sounds like it's going to be more of a senior management type of role. Obviously, it's not going to be president of hockey ops. So that's already a title held by Don Maloney. So basically, with Conroy being a first-time GM, they wanted to bring in, they didn't necessarily want to, but saw the opportunity, I guess you could say, to bring in a senior person who's been in the role before and has a lot of experience. And Nonis obviously impressed them during his interview to get a different role within their front office. It is also believed that Jerome Iginla will also be involved, not quite clear on his title, likely going to be in some sort of advisory type of role, at least to start with, and the role for him likely will grow over time. I know Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick on their 32 Thoughts podcast today also went through some more names that could be in the mix for head coach. We had previously mentioned Alex Tanguay, who, of course, we know guys like Conroy and Iginla extremely well from their playing days, and is a well-respected coach as well. But I feel the names to watch would be Mark Savard as well. Of course, also would have played around the same time as these guys. Mark Savard's done a great job in junior with the Windsor Spitfires, was an assistant coach at the NHL level for a brief time as well. And Andrew Burnett, let's not forget him as well. He's obviously, a brief amount of head coach experience at the NHL level, but was the head coach of Jonathan Huberdeau in Florida. Certainly getting him to unlock his talents and do much better in Calgary would be a big part of any new coach that's going to be involved with the Flames. Getting him to being back a 100-point player is absolutely, detrimental to that team having more success moving forward next year. So I'll be curious to see how quickly they move on a head coach, but obviously the management role is certainly much more important given the time of year that we're faced right now. The Columbus Blue Jackets, apparently there's reports that Mike Babcock is indeed very much in the mix there, and I'm not sure if we can go as far as to call him the front runner, but apparently he's far down the road with the Jackets, and I've talked to them on multiple occasions. Right now, things are kind of at a standstill with Jarmo Kekalainen being overseas, but that should be picking up again, hopefully here in the next week or so. But there is a good chance that Babcock could end up there. There was reports he had talked to and interviewed with the New York Rangers as well, but based on the latest we had heard from that was that it was unlikely that the Rangers would be offering him the job. But I know there's been a lot more talk too about Patrick Wall's name resurfacing to the Rangers again, which is something that we had talked about a few weeks back, but is obviously having more and more success here at the junior level with the Ramparts. Is not going to, certainly hurt his resume at all. So, of course, he is a former teammate of Chris Drury, who would know him quite well. So we'll see where that goes. Now, of course, with the Leafs and the Dubas and the Penguins and all that, let's kind of get into some of that. We do have some further updates on the Maple Leafs, and I do want to talk a bit about the future of Austin Matthews. I'm not going to come out and say that he's going to be traded, but I will say this, that then now more than ever, there's a lot more, I guess you could say, uncertainty around his future, and there are some that wonder, if the Leafs could be in a predicament where they might feel like they need to make a move. Obviously, we'll get into this all and break it down, but first with Dubas, and now, of course, Friedman confirms today on the 32 Thoughts podcast that on Saturday night, he had said that he was expecting Pittsburgh to reach out for permission to speak to Dubas with the Leafs. And today he's saying that they do indeed have that permission. Whether or not Dubas is serious about that will be the big thing here. He said he believes that Pittsburgh was getting really close to naming their new general manager, and that it was likely, if Dubas wouldn't have became available, likely would have been announced amongst the candidates that they've been talking to over the next couple of days, that they were that close. But they kind of put everything on hold when the opportunity arose to speak to him. So I think a lot of this is going to boil down to what Dubas wants to do. Does he want to go to Pittsburgh? Because there's obviously, I think he might jump right to the front of the line by the sounds of things as being their preferred candidate if he wants to. But, he had previously said it's Toronto or bust, basically, that he'd be taking some time off. But there's a lot of people still wonder if that was a bit of a negotiation tactic as well, because he did want to return as general manager of the Leafs. We do know that for certain. That was even confirmed by Brendan Shanahan himself. So, if he does want to, then it's going to be his call. So it'll be interesting to see if he takes up an opportunity there in Pittsburgh. We'll have to find out probably in the next week or so, I would be my guess. But like Friedman and Merrick did go on and discuss as well the connection of Dubas to Ottawa. Of course, I know a lot of people have mentioned that Dubas reportedly grew up as a Senators fan, and that's an attractive team he would like to work for, which would certainly add some intrigue to the Battle of Ontario moving forward, that's for sure. Right now, there's no openings as we speak, but with the change in ownership and coming here, that could create openings if they decide to move on from Pierre Dorion and DJ Smith and kind of bring in their own people. Even if it's not immediate, there is a possibility that if Dubas doesn't end up in Pittsburgh, that I would expect him to be eyeing that job should that job become available, whether it be later this year or after this season or what have you. Either way, it's something that would be something to watch for. So we'll see. Either way, Dubas is going to have his opportunities, and he will be back in the league in the not too distant future. It's going to be, I think, entirely up to him. But based on more words and more like of the talk here on the 32 Thoughts podcast from Elliotte Friedman, and of course a little bit from the Chris Johnson show as well, they both touched on this today. It really sounds that ultimately that there was a trust issue between Dubas and the board and Shanahan. Obviously, it goes to show you that Kyle Dubas, between his comments on his press conference on the Monday before he was let go, as well as the fact that one thing he wanted to see change within the organization, which would have been probably something he would have wanted to see in order for him to stay, was to streamline the authorities. So Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Merrick also talked about some new potential GM candidates on the 32 Thoughts podcast, talking about the fact, too, that some of these candidates with experience, which Shanahan made perfectly known that that's what he was looking for, might not want to work in the type of structure that they have at MLSE, of course, reporting to a powerful president like Shanahan, and of course having the board above them. Obviously, like I just said, like with the decision-making process that Dubas wanted to change, it's not a kind of process that I think a lot of previous GMs would be used to. So it might be complicated in that sense, but I know some of the names that have been mentioned again here include Marc Bergevin, former GM of the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, Brad Treliving kind of appears to be a front runner, but it's hard to say with certainty because we don't know how far along things are in discussions or if they've even interviewed him here as of yet. Mark Hunter's name is out there. I know Brendan Pridham with the Leafs, of course, AGM. I don't know that he's going to be really considered. I think they'll want him to be part of the team's front office still. Obviously, he plays an important role with being the camp specialist there, but at the same time, not sure that that's something that they want to consider here right now. But those are kind of the main names. I mean, there was some talk about guys like Doug Armstrong or George McPhee, but they're not coming to Toronto. They're obviously setting their roles with their existing clubs. They're under contract, and there's really no reason for them to go, to break their contracts or to try to get out of them. And really, those are powerful guys that have been around the league a long time. They're not going to want to work underneath Shanahan anyway. If Shanahan wasn't there and they're looking for a new president, that might be the kind of job that interests them, but not the other way around. So I don't think we're going to see names like that by any means, but certainly, like I said, it seems like it's going to be an interesting time in Toronto. They need to move quickly here to get some things straightened out because they need their GM because he's got lots of work to be done and lots of decisions to be made here. Now, of course, one thing that happened as well, which Chris Johnson talked about in his program, was that after Shanahan decided on the Dubas situation that he was moving on from him, and he reportedly spoke to several players, including the core of 4 guys, and CJ saying that those players all kind of walked away from those conversations with the expectation that they were not going to likely be dealt and that they'd all be coming back. Now, he says whether or not that's a realistic expectation, it's really difficult to say. I know he was surprised by that because he himself said he did not see the Leafs running back this team exactly the way it was, that there will likely be at least one significant trade of a significant piece to change the dynamic of the team and the DNA of the team to have a different style. Looking for that big, bold trade like we saw last year with the Tkachuk and Florida situation. Obviously, it's hard to make a deal like that work, mind you, because there's not a ton of players that fit that description, and it takes 2 teams to consummate a deal, which is complicated at times at the very least. So hard to say if they're going to find their trade, but you would think that based on everything we had heard, that they're very least going to be exploring all opportunities around those players and make that decision on how do they change things to make the team better and have a better chance to win moving forward. Now, of course, as we mentioned before, one thing that Friedman talked about today was the future of Austin Matthews. They're really wondering if the Leafs might get to a point where they feel like they need to trade him. I mean, at this point, I think that's premature to say, but the thing is that Friedman said he was told by a current Leafs player that even if Dubas would have stayed, that there was no guarantee by any means that Matthews signed on July 1st on an extension, knowing that this team, regardless of who's in charge, is obviously going to be going through a lot of changes. So whether it be with the core members or the surrounding cast, because we know that the supporting cast is going to be changing drastically because there's tons of expiring contracts, and it's just something that they go through on a yearly basis. But that Matthews would want to see where things sit and have a good look at the plan of the team, the future of the team, and what the team looked like going into the upcoming season before he really made a decision on signing an extension. But with Dubas being out of the way now and not being there and not being involved, that's going to set things back, and it's going to take more time to talk to Matthews and convince him on the direction of the team and all that. And it's going to be a tough job for the new GM for sure. So that they say it's pretty much a guarantee that there's no way. I mean, I guess we shouldn't say no way, but very, very, very unlikely that we see an Austin Matthews extension as soon as it's possible on July 1. It could come later, but it's something that's going to take some time for him to want to see all the changes that are made and how everything works out. So that's obviously very much risky for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, he still has another year in his contract, and some people just don't understand the magnitude here that once July 1st kicks in, Austin Matthews is going to have the entire leverage in this situation. The Leafs are going to have no leverage with him because he's going to be in the final year of his contract where he becomes an unrestricted free agent, can walk for nothing, and he's going to have a full no-move clause that kicks in on the same day on July 1. So if he doesn't want to be traded, he won't be. And if he does, if you guys decide you want to trade him and he will have to work with you, it's going to diminish his value, diminish the return value, and it's just going to create a scenario where you're possibly going to be at great risk to lose your star player for nothing. We've seen what happened to the Flames last year with Gaudreau and Tkachuk, and it'd be really weird if Brad Treliving came in as GM and had to deal with the same scenario and was faced with a star player walking for nothing. I guess he has experience with this, and you can make an argument that things didn't go so well for him last time, obviously losing Gaudreau for nothing. And yes, he helped orchestrate that massive trade with the Florida Panthers, but right now it's clear as day that the Florida Panthers are winning that deal with Matthew Tkachuk dragging his team all the way to the conference finals. They're up 2-0 with a chance to play for the Stanley Cup in his first season. So certainly that deal's working out well for the Panthers. Could it still work out really well for Calgary? Sure, but they're going to have to get drastic improvement and changes out of what they've brought in Huberdeau and Uyghur for that to really have a chance to even itself out. But, still at the end of the day, with Matthews, if they decide that he won't sign, do they get to a point that they feel like they need to trade him? That's the big question that people are talking about right now. There's even a betting website, because we know sports betting is such a huge thing right now, on what's Matthews' next team. And it was the best odds were the Chicago Blackhawks. That was an article in the Toronto Sun where we first learned about that, and that was, I think, 3 or 4 days ago. I know I was reading the article over the weekend. It was actually pretty short and sweet, just talking about the odds given to other teams to land Matthews as his next team, which is surprising. But especially Chicago being the top one, I was quite shocked by that. I don't see that happening. I mean, if Matthews did end up being dealt, I just don't see the rationale behind Chicago. They would not have the assets to give to Toronto, because if for any reason they went down that road of trading Matthews, they're going to want a star player coming back. And Chicago doesn't have that. The only one they would have after the draft would be Connor Bedard, and I don't see that happening either. That would be ridiculous. So, in all honesty, Matthews is not going to Chicago, even though the betting websites want to give out the best odds for making that happen. If he were to be traded, I would think there would be plenty of other teams that would make more sense. I know one team that comes to mind is the Los Angeles Kings, but that's really difficult to say where he would end up. But I guess the big concern here now is obviously talking about how he feels. I mean, Friedman said he was texting with one of the current players, and it just said that there's a lot of the exit interviews were rough. Things were just not going well. He said he was texting with somebody he knows who works at MLSE, like on the board side of things, and he said it was like Game of Thrones. Like it's really chaotic right now, and we don't know what's happening. And there's a lot of feelings that we don't know how everybody feels, and it's just it could be a crazy summer in Toronto, and we could have a situation where the top 4 players in the Leafs come back, and we could see a scenario where 1 or 2 are traded, and this team looks entirely different. What about Sheldon Keefe's role in all this? We don't know that either. But at the end of the day, I don't know that the Leafs are going to trade Matthews before July 1. I just don't see any scenario where they're going to be comfortable enough doing that. But at the same time, there's so much risk going into the final year with no extension in place. So I would imagine the pressure will be on the new GM to get that done before July 1, so that on July 1, when he's eligible, he'll be able to sign. But Matthews really has all the leverage here. But do you see a scenario at all where the Leafs panic and trade Matthews? But the way that things are structured and the process they have to go through to get approval, I don't see the board or Shanahan signing off on any kind of deal that way. I would imagine that the new GM, as they're being interviewed, that's going to be one of the big things that they're going to be asked on how they're going to handle free agency, how they're going to handle trades with the team and the big four. And they're not going to be hired if that's what they're going to try to come in and do right off the hop. So let me know your thoughts on the whole scenario, if you think Matthews could be traded or how they're going to handle things with the core four moving forward. Let me know your thoughts on that. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.